for a quick change. Here you go, P. I'm live. Oh, there you go, puppy. Good morning, everybody. We just had a little quick doggy exchange. My poor Cindy realized she got here and didn't have her reading glasses, and she would not be able to see anything. So she had to quick shoot home, and I kept the dog. All right, so we are getting ready to get started on our next section in Hearing God, and we're going to be looking now at the major prophets. So we've left behind the non-writing prophets, and then last week we looked at that whole kind of escapade with the Rabshakeh and the Rabsaris and the other guy, and they were confronting Jerusalem, and we were seeing the Tartan. That was it, and we were seeing how they confronted Jerusalem. They were, instead of coming and just speaking to Hezekiah on Sennacherib's behalf, they really let the whole city know, here's what's going to happen to you all. And with that is a good example. We see the way that the writing prophets work with the people to whom they speak. So we're going to open up with a word of prayer, and then we're going to dive into Isaiah. Gracious God, I want to thank you so very much for this morning. Lord, I thank you for your love for us and your graciousness. Lord, I thank you for the amazing ways that you work in our lives. And Father, I ask that you would lay your hands upon us today, that you would bless us richly, that you would open up our eyes, open up our hearts, and Lord, our ears, that we would learn to hear from you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. In Jesus' name, amen. Excuse me. So what I did was I went through Isaiah. We are not going to do every passage in Isaiah where God is speaking, because if we did every passage in Isaiah where God is speaking, we would start at chapter 1, verse 1, and we would end in chapter, I think it's 66, and we would be spending a very long time in the book of Isaiah. Book of Isaiah, I think, is the second longest book in the Bible. Psalms is the longest, and then Isaiah, I think, is the second longest. And actually, in ancient scrolls, when they translated from Hebrew into Greek, by adding the vowels, having words that had vowels in them, because Hebrew doesn't have vowels, it's all consonants. By adding words that had vowels, they needed a second scroll to finish out the book of Isaiah. The first scroll was too short. Scrolls were like 3 feet wide and 12 feet long. And so they ran out of space. So what we're going to look at are many of the examples of, and I doubt that we'll hit every different kind of way that God speaks to Isaiah, but I think we'll get a breadth of examples that will help us to wrap our mind around the different ways that God speaks to Isaiah or through Isaiah. So we're going to start in, not at chapter 1, although we're going to go back to chapter 1. So we're going to start in Isaiah chapter 6. So turn with me, please, to Isaiah chapter 6. I ended up in the Song of Solomon. There it is, Isaiah. And we're going to start with verses 1 through 7. Isaiah 6, 1 through 7. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. So in in chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, what is happening to Isaiah? He's having a vision. Now, I want to say that this passage is interesting to me because I was never concerned about the context of Isaiah, like Isaiah's particular location. I just perceived the text as saying that he was having a vision. He could be anywhere, walking around, and then he has this vision of God upon his throne. But where is Isaiah, quite apparently, from the text? Yeah. He's in the temple. I heard this from Janice just a few weeks ago, and I went, what? And I went back and looked, because the whole time I've been reading this, I have just perceived that Isaiah has this vision of God's throne room, because the temple is supposed to be a kind of like an effigy of God's throne room. It's supposed to in one way represent all of creation, and also it's supposed to represent God's throne room. And in fact, the word in the Old Testament, or in Hebrew, the word for palace and the word for temple are the same word. They basically just mean where the king lives. And so we translate them differently, as temple is the house where God lives, and palace is the house where the king lives. But in the Hebrew mind, they're the same word. So I'm just figuring that what he's having is a vision from God, where God is seated in the temple, and he's and all these things are happening. But Janice had mentioned, that Isaiah is a priest. And so he's serving in the temple. He's doing something worshipful. And in the midst of that, boom, in the temple, the place that is supposed to symbolize God's throne room, God comes and sits on his throne. Isn't that wild? I think it's pretty cool. So give me some details about how God is sitting on his throne. What do you see from the text? Yeah, it is high and exalted. When we sing it, we sing I, high and lifted up, right? We sing that, in I Want to Know You. High and lifted up. It's the same thing, high and exalted. That there he is, high and lifted up within the temple. And then his robe fills the whole place. The sense of the train of his robe, kind of thing. Who remember when we talked about whoops, Joseph? There we go. Old man moment. When we talked about Joseph, we talked about his coat that he wore, and that his father had made him, that Jacob had made him. And a lot of times it gets translated as a coat of many colors, and other folks have said maybe it just gets translated as an ornate robe. And my professor in seminary, Gordon Hugenberger, said he liked the translation, based upon other things that he'd studied in other ancient languages, of a coat with long sleeves. Remember that if you had a coat with long sleeves, they're hanging off. At the end, you have to bring them back so your hands are exposed. You don't do manual labor, right? Because if you have a coat with long sleeves, you can't grab stuff. Your job is to be waited upon by people. Well, if you have a robe that fills the temple, right, you don't have to wait on yourself. You have servants that gather around you. You are so mighty and powerful that people are happy to serve you, to carry out your wishes, to see to your comfort, to things like that, right? So this robe that fills the temple talks about God's majesty, God's glory, God's authority, God's sovereignty, that he is king. Janice. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. Right. Yep. So Janice says that R.C. Sproul, and if you don't know who R.C. Sproul is, you can do a lot worse than reading stuff from R.C. Sproul or listening to stuff from R.C. Sproul. Tremendous, tremendous theologian and biblical teacher. Sproul talked about that in the Orient, and I was so shocked to learn when I was in like college that the Orient is basically anything from the Middle East. That's all the Orient. It's all Asia, and in the Orient, the tradition was that the longer the train of the robe of a king, the more powerful that king. And if you think about it, it sort of makes sense. I know that all of us here, especially the guys, we sat down and we watched the wedding of Princess Diana and Prince Charles. I did not waste a moment of my life watching that. However, I have seen clips. And remember that great big long train that Princess Diana had? And if I remember correctly, weren't people carrying it? Yeah. Yeah. They carried it. Why? It's number one, it's too heavy. She's becoming royalty. Why did they carry it? So it wouldn't get dirty. You don't let the king's clothes, or in this case, the princess's clothes, get dirty. My clothes, they don't care. Well, my wife cares, and I care. But nobody cares if my clothes get dirty, right? It's not their job. But if it's the king's clothes, it's somebody else's job. And so that follows through as well, right? He has this coat, this cloak that fills the whole building. And as Janice had said, there'd be no king that would have a cloak or a robe or whatever that would fill a whole building, or the train that would fill a whole building. But if he were to move from one place to another, how many servants would it take to lift that up and carry it so it did not hit the ground until they could lay it in the place that it belonged? Right? It's all about authority and sovereignty and power and etc. Janice. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Yeah. High and lifted up. Yep. So I haven't read the book. I know somebody gave it to me at some point, and it's somewhere in my book reading pile. Books that I need to read. Heaven is for real, and this boy is questioned quite a bit by his father, who's a pastor, to be sure that nothing in the boy's vision was not in harmony with Scripture. And when he asked the boy what God looked like when he saw him seated next to Jesus, he said he was big. He was so big that when I looked up, I couldn't even see his face. High and lifted up. Pretty cool. What else do we get about this situation as he's looking at God? Yeah, some seraphim are above him, angels, and the word seraph is related. The seraphim related to the to the Hebrew word fire. So these are often they could be translated as burning ones or flaming ones or something like that. Fire often has to do with holiness and purging away sin. Um, and they are wonky looking, right? These are not the angels you see in your typical paintings from the Renaissance. Um, they have 6 wings, and with 2 they cover their eyes, and with 2 they cover their feet, and with 2 they fly, and they spend the whole time singing to God, right? Or singing to, or they guess they call to. It says they call to one another. So I guess I should say they are singing about God. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Um, Pretty awesome. And we're going to come back to that in just a moment, okay? Because the angels have what covered? Eyes and feet. Why eyes and feet? Their eyes. Yeah. Why cover their eyes? So they can't see. Why do they cover their feet? Potentially dirty, right? And so remember when this ties in so nicely with when Moses finds himself being, finds the presence of God in the burning bush, right? He walks up with his shoes that have just been, he's been, herding sheep. So you can imagine. And he's been walking up the mountain trying to find the sheep what got away, and comes up there and goes into the presence of this burning bush. And as he gets closer, he's told, take off your shoes, for where you're standing is holy ground. You don't bring uncleanliness into God's presence. And so these guys they're covering their feet. The other possibility is uh, sometimes in Hebrew, when they say one thing, they mean another. So where do your feet? I'll give you an example. In Genesis, when Abraham sends his servant Eliezer to go get him uh, a bride for his son, he says he says to him, make a covenant that you will not bring him a daughter from among the Canaanites, but you're going to go back to our people, and you're going to bring him a wife from our own people. And Eliezer, it says he puts his hand under his thigh and he promises, he makes the covenant with him. The thigh is on the leg, right? Where does the leg lead? Okay, what if you went up? Okay, well, to your private parts, right? And when Eliezer, it was very common in the ancient world that when you made a covenant with a person, you just didn't make the covenant with that person, but you made a covenant with all of their subsequent generations. And the belief was that a man in his private parts had all of his offspring for every generation, just like I've talked before, kind of like those Russian nesting dolls. You just keep opening them up, and they had no understanding of genetics. They believed that the father planted seed in the fertile soil of the wife, and that she then would give birth. Um, and so they say thigh in the Bible, either meaning that he did not hold his thigh, but he held his private parts and um, made a covenant with Abraham, or he held his thigh to be symbolic of his private parts. Does that make sense? So this seems like a weird excursus, right? In Exodus, the people are told, I think, yeah, we're going to peek at this a little bit later on. Well, we're going to leave it because we are going to peek at it. So we're going to leave that right there. And we're going to see that maybe covering the feet means something else, even though they are probably flying covering their feet. It could mean about not bringing your feet onto holy ground, but it could also mean something else symbolically for Isaiah. Okay, so we'll check that out in a few minutes. And anything else about the vision of God coming into this temple? Let's not get there yet. Okay, there's one more detail that happens. Smoke. Why is smoke important? Okay. The angels, seraphim. Okay. Smoke sterilizes, scares away bees or something, makes them calm. When a sacrifice is offered, smoke goes up. When Israel was led by God, pillar of smoke, pillar of fire. When Solomon calls upon God and dedicates the temple, what happens? When Solomon dedicates the temple, what happens? We looked at this. It was quite a few weeks ago, I think, when we were talking. I mean, it's quite a bit ago when we were talking about speaking. One sec. Solomon dedicates the temple. Solomon builds the temple. Temple furnishings. Wish I could remember the chapter. I know, right? Ark brought into the temple. So when the ark is brought into the temple, 1 Kings chapter 8, and when the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. So that this cloud or smoke, right? What's the difference between a cloud and smoke? Well, one will choke you, one won't. But and that's definitely true. But do you remember when there were those forest fires up in Canada and the winds directed them down here? Most of us said, "What's up with this weird fog?" Right? But it wasn't fog, it was smoke. And there's a lot of overlap between fog and smoke. A lot of overlap. At least in our perception of it. So what we're seeing is that we're seeing God filling the whole temple with his presence. It's not just that his cloak is running across the floor, right? But it's his whole presence has filled the temple. It's pretty phenomenal. So then we can ask Janice, what are Isaiah's concerns? Now you can fire away. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. And there he is standing there, right? Woe to me, I am a man of unclean lips. But you're a priest, Isaiah, right? And I come from a people, or I dwell among a people of unclean lips, and I'm dead because I have seen the living God, the Lord of hosts, right? What do the angels have covered? Right? The angels have their eyes covered, and here's poor Isaiah. Dope. I can see what the angels can't. I am up a creek. Pretty powerful. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So now, Janice, I think you reflect. Was it in Bible study? Maybe I can't remember if it was here or in Bible study that you'd reflected on that before. That this "woe is me" statement is like a complete breakdown. I have seen the living God, and I am dead. He's not just like, wow, woe is me. I have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. He's having a breakdown, total breakdown. Like, like if you knew Isaiah, you wouldn't recognize him acting like this. You'd be like, that looks like Isaiah's body, but that's not the way that Isaiah acts. Do you get what I'm saying? Like a total breakdown because he's seen God and he's like, I am undone. I am over with. And uh, when he says that I just want to think for a second. When he says, I am lost, I'm a man of unclean lips, I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. What is he saying about himself and about the people of Israel? Well, I guess I should say the people of Judah, and even about the other priests. Sinful. How sinful? Really bad. Quite possibly to the point. I mean, what Isaiah is saying is things come out of my mouth that never should come out of my mouth. Remember when Jesus is confronted about being unclean? He says it's not what a man puts into his body that makes him unclean. It's what comes out of a man's mouth that makes him unclean. It's the things that we say, the thoughts we don't get control of. Um, that's why the Bible, just as a quick aside, that's why the Bible has no problem with alcohol, but chastises drunkenness. Because you drink enough and your lips start to say things you ought not to say. And we are culpable for the things that we say. That's why self-control is talked about so much in the Bible. That's why we'll even see in our sermon today that's going to be a bit reflected upon as we look at our mission and as it relates to the Apostle Paul's mission, that what comes out of a person's mouth is the problem. And effectively, Isaiah is saying, we are no better. I am no better than the Moabites or the Edomites or the Philistines or the Syrians or the Assyrians or the Babylonians. I'm dead because I don't deserve to see God. And I live among a bunch of people that don't deserve to see God. It's as if he's saying that my sin, my own personal sin, compounds the sin of the people around me, which compounds my own. Right? You've seen that when people start speaking in a filthy way, that they fall into speaking into filthy ways altogether, and they build it. They keep just egging each other on, and that's what sin does. You can see it. look at the world around us, right? What used to be called absolutely unacceptable is called acceptable, expected, and is in next week, next year, it'll be nothing, because the sin of people just keeps compounding and compounding, and we it's like we bounce off one another. Um, hmm, yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, and Janice is reflecting on that. As a priest, he's saying, I'm a man of unclean lips that dwells among a people of unclean lips. He's speaking about himself as a priest, about the other priests, as much as he's speaking about the men and women of Jerusalem or the people of Judah. And that follow that through to today, that too easily we think pastors don't struggle with X, Y, and Z. But I can tell you that if you struggle with it, you'll find pastors that struggle with it, including quite possibly the one standing in front of you. That we pastors are human beings. We ought not to be thought of as not sinful, or we ought not to be thought up as we are on a pedestal, or we are better or more righteous. We are as broken, as messed up as everybody else. All right. So, what is God's response to Isaiah? Like verse 6. Mm-hmm. What is he? So the seraphim comes down. One of the seraphim comes down, takes some tongs, right, from the altar where sacrifice is happening, takes a coal, puts it to his lips. Why? Why does that cleanse it? Excuse me. Fire, sterilize, burning, cauterize. Right? We still might do that today, right? If there's a bad wound, man, I've heard about people that have like they have like some kind of weird internal bleeding going on. They cauterize it, shuts it right down. It's not we don't think of it as the best way to deal with a medical problem, but it's a way that's been practiced for thousands of years, right? Cauterize that wound. We can't fix this, so to speak, but now we know how to deal with a burn. And so God looks at Isaiah. He has a bleeding problem, right? Out of my mouth just comes filth. And God says, I'll fix it. And he purifies it. He cauterizes it. He stops the flow. Because Isaiah is going to have a new job now. And instead of filth coming out of his mouth is going to come the word of God. All right, so let's take a little peek at verses 8 through 13. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, here I am, send me. And he said, go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. Then I said, how long, O Lord? And he said, until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and the houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. And the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again like a terebinth or an oak. whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. So what is Isaiah's call? And how does he receive the call? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So Janice reflects that just like 2 weeks ago, I think you sent me the devotional. Yeah. That was, I think you sent it to me just after I'd started this lesson and prepared for us to be coming here first, which was really cool. So she sent me this devotional from Oswald Chambers from about 2 weeks ago, where Chambers meditates on the reality that Isaiah didn't know what his call was, what God wanted him to do, until God said, I need a volunteer. And Isaiah says, pick me, pick me. And the amazing reality is, we can see from this text that there are times when God may just be calling, I need somebody faithful. And our response ought not to be, right? Hey, do you ever do this? You ever have this happen with like your kids? I need a favor. What do you need? I need somebody to do something for me. What is it? Right? Let me know if I think that this task is worth my time. That's how children might act with their parents, or maybe even, a reluctant employee or whatever. And when God calls out to us and says, I need someone faithful, instead of going, well, let me know if it's something I want to do. Or maybe I'm already on my way to the store and I'll pick it up for you, right? The kind of thing. I'm too busy. Yeah, well, right. That's the other thing, right? You remember like that kind of trope you might see when the commander in the military walks up and says, we need 12 men. And the whole line of people step back one, right? And they leave other guys abandoned out in front, right? It's we need to be saying to God, I'm your guy. I'm your woman. I'm faithful. I will follow. Pick me, pick me. Send me out. That's what Isaiah does. And then Isaiah says basically, all right, what's my job? And what does God say his job is going to be? Be God's spokesperson to whom? What kind of people? This people. And what are their traits? And what does God say he's going to do as a result of their traits? Well, first, what does it say? Just before verse, what does it say in verse 9? Go and say to this people. Yeah. Be ever hearing, never understanding. Be ever seeing and not perceiving. And then and so he says, here's what I'm going to do, right? God says, make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and